most people think of fundraising as just about as much fun as chewing glass. And if that's how you're feeling about it going into demo day, I totally get it. I've been there. Prior to joining Andreessen, I raised money for two of my own funds. And I've also been on the receiving end of literally thousands of pitches over the years. So I've seen one or two things. And hopefully today we can walk through a few steps and key learnings that will help make the process a lot less painful. And not feel nearly as bad as glass chewing. So what we're going to start with today is kind of how you actually want to run the entire process. So from start to finish, how are you going to think about the story you're going to tell, how you're going to position your narrative. Then we'll get into some of the actions you're going to take before you start pitching. Obviously, we'll touch on the pitch itself, and then the types of follow-up activities that are super important after you're done with your pitch. So most people think about pitching as revealing information, but it's really more about answering questions. So these are two of the most important ones that should really help guide your narrative. You want to be thinking about what is the total size of the opportunity here. Assuming you nail it, hit it out of the park, what is that going to look like? How big is this market? How big is your vision? How big is the opportunity? And as a second follow-up, you're going to want to make sure that you're positioning your team as the right people to execute on that vision, making sure that you demonstrate how your experience feeds directly into your ability to win this market. A question I always like to ask is what is this going to look like if everything is successful in 5 years? And the answer to this question is the key theme of your pitch. You want to make sure to bring the investor along on this journey as you paint that picture for them. So I'm going to pause for a second and let you think about what your 5-year vision is and how you might articulate it to an investor. So as you're coming up to the pitch itself, you're going to want to make sure that you have an organized plan for how to approach things. So first of all, you're going to sit down and literally make a plan. How are you going to run the process? What is the timeline going to look like? You're also going to kick off with a list of investors, making sure that you know who the right people are and organizing those conversations strategically so that you're meeting with the friendliest folks first. It's inevitable that your pitch is going to get more crisp, more concise, and more effective as you practice it. And you may also encounter some tough questions as you're starting out. So the more you're able to really think through what those conversations are and practice in advance, the better positioned you're going to be. You'll also want to make sure to really understand who the investors are that you're going to be speaking with and whether they have made any investments in the relevant category. I think a very telling example comes to mind, which is Brian Armstrong, who you heard from earlier in the cohort, had said at one point in an interview that he had a really challenging time. Obviously, Coinbase has gone on to massive success, but when he was starting out raising his seed round, he had a hard time meeting an investor and selling them on both Bitcoin and Coinbase if they hadn't already heard of Bitcoin. But if they were already sold on Bitcoin and understood the concept, he was much more easily able to get them over the hump. So you want to be finding people that you don't have to sell on both the category and your company. Ideally, they'll already be excited about the category and you can focus exclusively on selling your company. So in order to make all of this work, you're going to do a few things. You're going to meet your idols. You're going to use your network for warm introductions, and you're going to think about the market timing. Now, on the network point, obviously cold outreach can work as well, but it's a great opportunity to put all the relationships that you've spent the last years building to work. So past colleagues, advisors, folks like that. It can be great if you start off with a list of people and then ask others to add on to it if there may be folks that you missed. Obviously, controlling the market is a little bit outside anyone's powers. And if we could all roll back the clock to 2021, I'm sure we'd all go fundraise then. But what's really important is that your specific company is well positioned to fundraise when you go out. So think about, do you have the right metrics? Do you have your financials buttoned up? Do you have good answers? And have you thought through the idea maze before you kick off some of these conversations? So take a second to read this quote from Justin. Once you figured out which investors you want to be talking to, this is a super critical pitfall to avoid. Build it and they will come, in my opinion, is one of the biggest lies in startups. And more experienced founders often come to this conclusion, having learned this lesson the hard way. So, what are you thinking about if not just product? It's go to market. So, figuring out how to effectively distribute your product and making sure that you know what kinds of channels, whether that be partners or other kinds of distribution networks, you can put to work. I know you've heard a lot about that topic from Maggie and Pierce and a few others on the team, but I really can't emphasize how important it is. Being on the receiving end of a pitch, you want to make sure that the founders are not just thinking about a perfect product, but that they actually have a plan for how to get this in front of the right audience. An example from Web 2 that comes to mind is the great Dropbox space race example. So this was something that Dropbox launched in 2012. And obviously storage space is not a particularly viral product by nature, but they were able to create a program whereby college students were incentivized to sign up. When they signed up, they got free space. And then they created sort of a competitive element where different colleges can compete with one another. And that way, basically generated a viral loop. And that kicked off a really dramatic bout of growth for Dropbox. So think about, for your company or your network, whatever the case may be, what can you be doing that's going to be a kind of distribution hack that's going to help you drive that go-to-market flywheel? So we've touched on a few of these points, but kind of to sum it up, you're going to want to make sure that you understand your market super well. And I really can't stress how important it is to practice out loud before you start pitching. Now, obviously, you don't want to take it to the point where you've got the whole thing memorized and it sounds super stilted, but you will absolutely kind of come up with more concise way of saying things. Just be more confident in your delivery if you practice in front of a mirror with other friends or advisors, and all of that effort will certainly serve you well once you get to talking to actual investors. You're also going to want to make sure to tailor your deck to help investors see how you tie into their investment thesis and how you connect with their existing portfolio. So you really want to make it easy for them to imagine you fitting into their existing portfolio. Now, this is a question that I highly recommend having an answer prepared for, because you're almost certainly going to get asked it by a lot of VCs. I certainly ask it a lot myself. So really think about what you are looking for aside from money from your investors. Dum, dum, dum. Now the most exciting part, the pitch itself. Before we get into kind of the meat of it, I think it's helpful to cover a few logistical items. And if these sound self-explanatory to you, that's great. But I assure you, I have seen all manner of these gone wrong. So I think still useful to kind of sum them up. First off, you want to make sure that people can actually see you and that your camera is on and that you don't look like you're in the witness protection program. So make sure that you are visible and understandable. Energy is critical. Investors are really going to be mirroring your energy. So if you seem like you're bored talking about your own company or project, it's really unlikely that you're going to be able to get an investor sufficiently excited. Now, obviously, you want the enthusiasm to be genuine and authentic, but I'm sure each of you is really excited about what you're building. So that shouldn't be hard to do. So just make sure that the energy is there and that you're conveying that appropriately to the investor. You also want to make sure that you're speaking clearly. And obviously don't be late. That one's hopefully pretty straightforward. And lastly, remember that this is a dialogue. So if you start to see that your audience is drifting, that people are not paying as much attention as you'd like, it might be a good time to ask a question and make sure that you're reeling them back in. Certainly better to have a conversation than a monologue. So much more likely to result in a positive outcome for you. Now, getting into the substance of the actual conversation, you're going to want to make sure to tell a story. And I really can't emphasize enough how important that is, because it's your narrative, it's your opportunity to really explain how you got here and what you're looking to build. And it's also critical as you're thinking, as you're walking through the pitch, that you make sure to connect the dots for the investor. Now, obviously, this is very clear to you because it's your story, you understand it super well. But you want to make sure that you're conveying the domain expertise. You're also showing how your background feeds into that. And you're explaining to the investor what motivates you to take this company or network all the way. And doing this before you actually get into the substance of a pitch is a great way to get their attention going from the first moment. So once you've gotten to the point of negotiation, this is certainly a great spot to be in. Not being an asshole sounds like it should be pretty straightforward and very obvious. So I won't say much about it. But I do think it's important to note that investors generally have a lot more experience negotiating than you do because we do it all day. So make sure not to come across as overly aggressive, as that can be really off-putting on the receiving end. You can be firm and you can be, hold the line if you have a price in mind, but make sure that you are maintaining a professional demeanor and a certain politeness as you kind of work through the process with the investor. So in terms of setting price, now, if you're Jeff Bezos today raising for your new company after Amazon, you can inevitably name your own price. But if you are Jeff Bezos raising the seed round of Amazon, which is more where you guys are at right now, then figuring out what the right price is really going to be a conversation with the lead investor. So you want to make sure that you are not sort of painting yourself into a corner by setting a price that's not going to be market clearing. And I think that is honestly particularly important in a market environment that's a little bit less favorable. So certainly good to keep that in mind in any market though. Generating momentum is really the name of the game here. So as soon as you're able to generate one offer, it's going to be a lot easier for you to generate several. You want to be able to basically create FOMO and excitement without being misleading about where you are in the process. A lead investor is also going to really be the cornerstone of your round and sort of help you put together the rest of the round. So prioritizing folks who will actually lead is very important as you think about putting together the round itself. Okay, so coming out of the pitch, you need to continue to do your homework and follow up so that you can actually choose the best partner. Obviously, we touched on negotiating. Persistence is also really the name of the game here. So making sure that you can time box your negotiations in such a way that you don't let them drag on and you can actually keep the process rolling. Getting a good lawyer, I really can't stress how important this is. It sounds like a cheap lawyer might be good. It's cheap, right? But no, you will pay for it later, and it can end up being extremely expensive. So I really highly recommend finding counsel who has experience in startups and specifically in Web3, because it's really going to serve you well in the long term. And then in the same way that investors will do a reference check on you, it's a great idea to do reference checks on them. So you might ask them for a few names and contact information of CEOs that they've backed previously. I always think it's a great idea to say, to ask for both success cases and not success cases, because it's great to know that your investor is going to be supportive if you kill it and end up being the next big thing. But it's also helpful to know who's going to be there for you when, if you end up struggling at any point. So definitely good to do reference checks. As I mentioned, you can ask directly to the investor, but also helpful to do background ones where you might, back channel and find folks that they didn't refer you to. All right. So we've looked at how to come up with your story, how to frame your deck, how to successfully manage investor conversations. And now we're at the finish line. Exciting. Congratulations. You get to close the deal. However, bad news for you, you're not really done. So, this is the phase in which you get to have a little bit of role reversal with your investor and basically put them to work as you transition from pitching to being a portfolio company. An important part of that transition is a little bit of a demeanor shift. So obviously, you've just spent weeks and weeks telling the investors how you're so amazing and you're going to be the next huge success. Now you want to be a little bit less, a little bit less confident and maybe a little bit more authentic about the areas where you're struggling. And the reason this is so important is because as you think about how to successfully manage a relationship with your investor, you want to make sure that you are never surprising them. I think frequent dialogue, bad news coming early is absolutely the right way to manage this relationship. I think on the engagement point, I personally do monthly check-ins with each of my companies, and I find that these are most productive when the founder brings in specific challenges or areas in which they're struggling. So, for example, we're trying to get a connection with a specific partner and we're not finding it, or we're getting blocked on the App Store. And these are all things that your investors should be able to put their network to use for and help you sort out. So on the talent side, I think the first hires of any company really set the tone for what the hiring bar for that company is going to be going forward. So this is another great place to put your investors to work. Obviously, if they're specialized in the area that you are building in, which is what we hope, they should have a really robust network of people who they can tap to potentially become, your next set of new employees. So that is another super high leverage way to specifically put your investors to work. Now, all of that said, it's really critical to remember that this is a marathon and not a sprint. This is going to be a very long-term relationship. They sometimes say that it's, getting an investor is like a marriage, except worse because you can't get a divorce. So hopefully you guys all end up having amazing relationships, but it's great to really go into it thinking that this is a long-term thing and you want to build the right rapport with your partner right as you get started. So for those of you who already have a deck, see if you can apply these principles to it. And if you don't, start from the beginning and use this as a roadmap. Hopefully there's a path forward to a successful fundraise here now that doesn't feel like chewing glass for you guys. And now I will open it up for questions.
Hey, Arianna, this is Jess from Blockus. Thanks for the talk. Actually, really hands-on, really, really relevant, really, really helpful. Really appreciate that. I think just a question for you, without naming names, who was your favorite founder and what was the most memorable moment for you?
Oh, geez, without naming names, who? That's a hard one to answer.
You can name names. I'm just not forcing you to.
Well, let's see. Hard to pick favorites, but I will tell you about a very memorable pitch, which was the first conversation I ever had with Anton from Talos. So first of all, to set the stage, there's a bit of a personal story. I had a migraine that day. I was really not feeling well. I literally almost canceled the meeting, which I try never to do. But I was really feeling poorly. But I heard that I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I had heard that he had flown all this way. And so I was like, oh, fine, I'll pull myself together. So I meet him, and I mean, it was just charisma out the wazoo, incredibly thoughtful answers, really passionate, and absolutely going to run through walls in order to make his company successful. It was very apparent to me from the first conversation. And I think it's really what I was saying earlier, having both deep domain expertise. He had spent years and years and years in traditional capital markets building the exact kind of financial infrastructure that he wanted to now build in crypto. So he checked the founder market fit box super well. And then also there was just this energy, this enthusiasm, this willingness to do anything to make this company work. And I think he conveyed that extremely well. And by the way, I think my first impression was very right. He's gone on to build an amazing business over the 5 or so years that I've known him now. So I think try to really channel that energy, because clearly it's memorable if I'm talking about it a few years later.
Yeah, awesome. So founder market fit, being willing to run through walls, and charisma is the name of the game. Got it.
Exactly.
All right, Jay from Ethan ID just actually took my question. I was just going to ask about like what were some your favorite pitches that perhaps would you have another one that you can pick out that?
Well, that was certainly one. Let's see about another one. Well, I distinctly remember a pitch that I took with Cara and Elena, who you've met probably on the deal team. And this was the first pitch with Janine from Every Realm. And Elena had such a good phrase to describe it. It's escaping me, but she just really she was so crisp in her delivery, so confident, had clearly really thought deeply about the idea maze she's building in the metaverse space, and had really thought about it from both a traditional and a Web3 native perspective. We all came away, Elena said she was wildly impressive. And I think that was really an excellent way of summing up that conversation. So again, you really want to project confidence and the fact that you understand your domain space, which is exactly what she did.
I see. Thank you. And the second question is more tactical concerning with demo day, and how would you recommend strategizing or planning that out post demo day?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I couldn't hear the second part.
So how do you plan on strategizing out the process post demo day? Like after we do demo day, we have inbound investment requests or inbound calls for investments. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you want to follow a lot of the same principles that we went through this way. I think it's going to be important to make sure that you're kind of trying to time box the negotiation. So don't schedule a call now and then for 3 weeks out, because that's going to be difficult to do it. Try to really compress the timeline. And for example, if an investor tries to schedule 3 weeks out, try to push back a little bit and say, hey, we're expecting to wrap up the process a little sooner. Might you have any availability before then? And oftentimes they will make an effort to kind of rework their calendar and meet sooner. So I think that's definitely an important part of the step. I would also kind of do a bit of a stack ranking of who you're most excited about and who is likely or who can lead, so that you're prioritizing those conversations, as I was saying earlier. I think really a lot of the principles that we kind of ran through apply here. It's just that process happening after demo day rather than without a demo day.
I see. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marielle from Metaport. Great talk. I have a question regarding traction and like the stage of where we are at, like very early stage companies. What would be your definition on like good traction?
Sure. So obviously this depends, and it's important to keep in mind that companies get funded with zero metrics, lots of metrics. So the metrics are not by any means the single determining factor of a given fundraise. I think it really depends what your key metric is. So I would spend time thinking about, okay, what is the number one most important metric of the health of this business or network? And try to have, in an ideal world, you would have a couple of months of at least 20% month over month growth for that key metric. Now, obviously that might not be possible if you've literally just launched, you might only have a couple weeks of data. But I think in a perfect world, that's what you would want to see.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, please join me in thanking Arianna Simpson for that great talk. Thank you, Arianna.